To the conclusion of this little retreat. So we're going to kind of do some more really profound suttas about developing perception today, and then we kind of conclude it tomorrow morning. But still lots of nice things coming up, so stay tuned, as they say, and we'll see what happens. So yesterday we had a look at some of the perceptions in regard to old age, death, sorrow, the kind of usual human things in the human realm. It was very interesting yesterday because after the little bee sting I had, and everyone wanted to give me medicines and look after me. But which is very nice. It's very nice to be looked after. But actually I was okay. The thing you should feel sorry for is the bee. The bee was dying. The bee didn't have any chance. The bee was the one who had the problem. So next time we should look after the bee instead. Scoop up the bee, take it to the bee doctor, and kind of make sure it's okay. So anyway, it's kind of poor bee. It got really scared when you touch it, and then it kind of stings, and then it loses its life. This is kind of the nature of samsara. And the more you kind of look at these little details, the more terrible it is, this whole idea of being reborn and going around. You don't know what you're doing. You're just feeling frightened. You sting, and then you die. And it's kind of also kind of terrible in a sense. Anyway, so yesterday we were looking at these ideas that are very much part of the samsaric realm and the human realm as well. Dying, sorrowing, and all of these things. And so these are perceptions that we can develop, and these are probably some of the most important perceptions that we can use because they are very natural, they're very easy, we understand what these things are about. And then comes a whole sutta on how to deal with ill will and anger. I've talked about this quite a bit already, and I've also talked about this on previous retreats. So I'm going to skip that sutta because otherwise it's going to be too much repetition. Then comes a sutta on how to deal with the sensory realm, the realm of the five senses. Beautiful similes in the Potalya Sutta about the sensory realm. I'm going to skip that one too, but I'm going to talk about some of those similes as I talk about other things later on, so they will kind of be touched upon anyway. So what I want to talk about now is more about the perception of anicca, of impermanence, because this is one of the foundational perceptions on the Buddhist path. And I would say that if there is one perception among dukkha, anatta, among many of the other things that the Buddha is talking about, this is one of the most important ones, and the one that is talked about most often in the suttas. And the perception of anicca is actually, on the surface, quite simple, and that is why it is very accessible to us, because we can understand the beginning of anicca quite easily. It's easy to observe how everything is always changing around us. It is easy to understand that if you attach too much to the things of the world, you're going to suffer. It's kind of very obvious. And so we can see the anicca. We can easily see the connection from anicca to dukkha. This kind of connection is very obvious. And down the track, you will also see the connection between anicca and anatta, non-self. These things have a very strong connection, but anicca is in many ways the foundation, and it brings all of these other things with it. And one of the perceptions that we will probably look at as well is what I mentioned yesterday, sabbaloka anabhirati sanya. This is also really comes down to the idea of anicca, how everything in the world is impermanent, and so the whole world is not to be delighted in, and you reject everything in the whole world after a while. So we're going to look a little bit more detail about this. And one of the important things when we deal with these difficult perceptions like anicca, it is important that we develop the positive sides on the path at the same time. Focusing too much on the difficult things, focusing too much on the negative, if we're not skilled with these things, it can lead to, sadness or whatever, because the world is unreliable, everything is so uncertain. But by developing the positive aspects of the mind, developing the joys that come through generosity and kindness and all of these kind of things, and we find a nice kind of balance with these things. We're able to deal with it better. And that's kind of the beauty of this. So this is how we go about these things. Now, many of the contemplations we have talked about already, like old age, like death, these are actually contemplations of anicca. They come down to the idea of impermanence. And so when you contemplate death, you are kind of bringing impermanence into that in a very powerful way. And so when the Buddha talks about the kind of 5, what is called the Abhinna Paccavekkatabba Thana Sutta, the 5 things that are to be cultivated by everyone, they are the perception of old age, the perception of sickness, the perception of death, or the contemplation, if you like, maybe not perception, but the contemplation of these things, the contemplation that everything beloved and dear to me will become otherwise, and the last one, I'm the heir of my karma. And so most of these are about impermanence, how things are always changing. They are practical applications of the idea of impermanence. And the practical applications are often the most powerful, because the practical applications are easy to understand, and that's why they are more powerful. They have more emotional effect when you use these practical applications of these things. So now, however, let's look at this sutta called the Anicca Sanya Sutta, and to see what the Buddha has to say about this. Here we are looking at anicca in a more complete kind of sense. So this is on page 20 in this printout here. This is found in the Samyutta Nikaya 22, which is the Khanda Samyutta, Sutta number 102, Anicca Sanya Sutta, the perception of impermanence. So let's see what the Buddha has to say about this. Mendicants, when the perception of impermanence is developed and cultivated, it eliminates all desire for sensual pleasures. It eliminates all desire for rebirth in the realm of luminous form, and it eliminates all desire for rebirth in a future life. It eliminates all ignorance, and it eradicates all conceit, I am. So that's pretty good for the humble perception of impermanence. And you can see it does everything you want it to do on the path, taking you all the way to arahantship. And the 2 kind of main concerns about impermanence here, the very first one is for many people maybe the most interesting one, that when you develop the idea of impermanence, you eliminate all desire in the 5 sense realm. For the 5 senses, you eliminate all of these things. And this is, for most people, the most important one, at least until you get to samadhi. Once you get to samadhi, these other ones become more important. But to get you to samadhi, this is a very useful contemplation. It takes away all of these things. And again, the way to do this kind of contemplation, as I mentioned just a moment ago, is like death contemplation, for example, is a very powerful one to help us with that. And also, to a lesser extent, old age. Everything that is dear and agreeable to me must be separated from me. It's a very powerful contemplation as well, once it starts to sink in. I don't know if you remember in the Paramita Sutta, the Buddha gets sick. He's coming to the end of his life. He knows that he will die in 3 months' time or whatever it is. And he's really ill during the last rains retreat. He's abiding just outside of Vesali. And then Ananda becomes very distraught. Ananda, he says to the Buddha, "Oh, the directions are not clear to me, I cannot remember the Dhamma." And these things, he is very distraught by the Buddha's sickness, because he realizes the Buddha may be not so far from dying. And then later on in the same sutta, the Buddha says to Ananda, everything, remember, I have taught you so many times, everything that is dear and agreeable to you must become otherwise, must become separated from you. And this is exactly that same teaching that the Buddha uses to show that even the Buddha himself, who is so dear to the whole community, dear to the monastics, the monks, the nuns, and of course to the lay community, even the Buddha has to go. Everything in the world has to go. The Dhamma itself, we are so lucky to encounter the Dhamma in this life. The Dhamma is this precious thing, but the Dhamma itself is impermanent. And the more you understand this idea of impermanence, the more problematic it all becomes. And then you have to understand that now is the opportunity to deal with these things. And so this is this advice of the Buddha in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta to Venerable Ananda, when the whole Buddhist community is really distraught. The Buddha, the person, they were always looking after them, who gave them advice about the smallest little things to the biggest things. The Buddha was always there. He was the one who kind of set everything out. Imagine losing the Buddha. It's kind of very, very powerful moment in Buddhist history. And in the sutta I was just talking about before, the Potaliya Sutta, the Buddha expands on these things, on the unreliability of sensual pleasures. And one of the similes that I have kind of thought for a long time was quite powerful in driving home the idea of the impermanence of sensuality. It's a simile that I usually teach whenever I teach retreats or even give talks. And this is the simile of the borrowed goods. It's it's a very nice and easy to understand simile. And in this simile, the Buddha says, well, suppose that someone borrows some nice goods. And in this suttas, the nice goods is a little bit kind of funny from our standpoint, but the nice goods is like a chariot. You can imagine you get a chariot drawn by horses. That was considered very luxurious in those days, to have your own chariot drawn by horses. And then you had some nice jewelry. Jewelry also considered luxurious. So you have this man driving around in a chariot that he has borrowed and wearing jewelry that he has borrowed. And then when he drives around, people say, "Oh, look at this wealthy person. This is how the wealthy enjoy their wealth." And of course, what happens when other people see you like that is that you start to identify with those things. You become that wealthy person. That becomes your identity. That becomes who you are. And the more you identify with it, and the more you crave for it because it is pleasing to you in one way, the more difficult it is to give up, right? And because of that, when the owners come and take back the things that he had borrowed, it's really difficult for you. And this man, he kind of grieves and sorrows because the owners take back the jewelry and take back the carriage. And this is the sensory realm. Everything we own in the sensory realm is like a borrowed goods. All the things that we own, all the relationships that we have, all the status that we have in this society, in the end, even the body that we have is a borrowed good. We have it for a while and then it's gone. It's kind of almost like we were talking yesterday about whether life is an illusion or not. And in one sense, it is kind of a little bit like an illusion, because you go through things, and in your previous life you had another body, and now who cares about that body? You had other relationships, they're all gone. It kind of doesn't really have any impact on you anymore. And still, even though all of these things are gone in the past, now in this life we grieve when we lose them. But then in your next life, you think back to this life, it's gone. Who cares? And then you grasp something else. You grasp some other person, some other good, some other body. And you think that's very important. You can see how crazy it is when we go on like this. And so everything we have in this life is a borrowed good. You have it for a while, then you have to give it up. Nature will reclaim it. nature will take it back. And nature in this case just means impermanence. It means the laws of how the world actually functions. And when you start to think about everything in your life as a borrowed good, you think about it differently. What is it like when you rent a car compared to when you own a car? It's a very different feeling, right? If you own your car, you want to look after it, you wash it, you clean it. If someone scratches it, you get really upset because they scratched your car. If someone steals it, it really is very important to you. But if you rent a car, if it scratches, it's no big deal, right? If it's a bit dirty, you don't worry too much about it. If someone steals it, okay, whatever is the problem of the insurance company or whatever, it's not your problem, really. It's a very different feeling when you rent something or you borrow something compared to when you own it. So one of the ways of dealing with this is get into the perception of borrowing in this life. Everything you have is temporary. Everything is borrowed. That doesn't mean we become stupid. It doesn't mean we don't care. We still look after things because that is what a good person does, look after things. But it means we don't attach so much because we understand the impermanence of these things. And so what we then focus on instead, we focus on those things that are not borrowed. And what is it that is not borrowed? Your kamma, kamma sakka. You are the owner of your kamma. Kamma is your own. Why is that? Because you take it with you. And sometimes the kamma will have an effect for a very long time into the future. Life after life, it may come with you. So this is why it is said to be, it is your own. You own it. Even kamma at the end of the day, you don't really own. Eventually it will wear out and it will be gone. But it's far more close to ownership than the things that we have in this world. And so you change your ideas about what is important. You start to invest more in accordance with things that last. Investing here means that you invest in the mind. You invest in the spiritual life. You invest in being kind, caring, generous, peaceful, compassionate, having metta, all of these qualities that we want to develop on this path. That is what we invest in, because that is really worthy of investment. Whereas all of these other things are not worthy of investment in the same way. A little bit of investment, only a tiny bit. And most of it goes into having a good heart and living a good life. This is how we shift our perspective when you understand the impermanence, the anicca, the unreliability of the five sense world. There's nothing really to hold on to there. It is so incredibly fleeting. Before you know it, you're out of here. Everything has to go. So this is one of the similes found in the Potalya Sutta, which is kind of very useful to reflect on, I think. There's so many beautiful similes there. I will tell you one other simile that to me kind of also makes a very kind of strong impact about the five sense world. It doesn't relate directly to anicca, but anyway, I think it's useful to kind of talk about briefly here. And this is the simile of the piece of meat. And according to this simile, a bird gets hold of a piece of meat, and the piece of meat here signifies the five sense world, the sensual pleasures in the world. And the bird that gets hold of the piece of meat, that's like the person who grasps in that world. And then the bird gets hold of the piece of meat, it flies off, and then of course other birds realizes this bird got a piece of meat. We also want that piece of meat. You can't have that piece of meat just for yourself, you foolish bird. And they go after that bird. And these other birds are maybe bigger, they are stronger. And this little bird, kind of trying to hold on to the piece of meat, is very scared because these bigger birds are coming behind it. But it's also greedy at the same time. It wants to hold on to that piece of meat. This is just like the kangaroos at Bodhinyana Monastery. They are driven by greed and fear. And so when you want to give them food, sometimes I have some leftover food in the bowl, and I want to give it to the kangaroos. And the kangaroos come on, they come forward, they want to get the food, but then they get frightened, they go one step back, and they go a step forward, one step back. And they don't know what to do, because the greed and the fear is kind of working together like this. It's kind of fascinating to see these powerful drives in animals. And of course, we have similar drives as human beings. And so this bird, you can imagine what it does. And then the sutta says, the simile says that if that little bird doesn't give up that piece of meat very quickly, it will either die or it will have death-like suffering as a consequence. And this is the world of the five senses. The world of the five senses is a competitive world. We all want the same thing. We want the same partners. We want the same jobs. We want the same raise. We want the same, if there's only a limited amount of food, we want the same food. We fight over that. We're always competing with each other. And that competition means that there will be winners, there will be losers. That competition means that there will often be violence in our society. Violence is often fought because of things in the five sense world. You look at some of the wars in the world, sometimes it is war over oil, sometimes like the war in Ukraine is like Russia wants to expand into Ukraine because to make Russia larger or whatever it is. It's always about this idea of the five sense realm, fighting over what is there. And this is so problematic. And so what that means is that the five sense realm is inherently full of conflict. It is inherently a realm of violence, of war, of problems. And you cannot have a five sense realm without these things. It is always going to be part of it. So yes, you can create a society that is a little bit better, a little bit more fair, where there's less problems or whatever. And you can see that in the world. Some societies are better, some societies are worse. But you can only go so far. At the end of the day, human greed, human desire is going to clash against the desire of other humans. And then we're going to fight each other and we're going to create all of these problems. And that's kind of really off-putting. When you understand that the five sense realm is inherently full of war, conflict, greed, violence, that is kind of really, really off-putting. And it really wants you, gives you that desire to get out of this realm, this realm of dukkha. There's a very powerful sutta called the Attadanda Sutta in the Sutta Nipata, in the Atthakavagga Sutta Nipata, Sutta number 14, I think there. And this is about the Buddha just realizing this, or the Buddha to be, before his awakening. Another one of these autobiographical suttas of the Buddha. And he says, when I see the world in conflict, when I saw people thrashing about like fish in a small puddle, you're thrashing about. You have this small world that we all live together in, and we're thrashing about, trying to escape like a fish in a small puddle. And this kind of people fighting each other, as it says there. People always in conflict. And the Buddha to be, when I saw this, I got scared. I got concerned. This was one of the things that drove the Buddha to be out of samsara to find a solution to the problem. So this is a very unpleasant aspect of our existence, and it is related to the five sense realm. Once you remove yourself from the five sense realm and you go to the rupa loka and the loka of the mind and the jhanas and these kind of things, these are non-violent realms, and you go beyond that. So these are some of the one of the similes that you find in this particular sutta. And so they're very kind of powerful. And I would recommend you to read some of those similes. There are many, many more there. Some of my favorites, the simile of the bone, or the skeleton, the dog chasing the skeleton and the bone, or chasing sensual pleasures, like chasing a bone. It's kind of, all of these are very fascinating. The dream, sensual pleasures are a bit like a dream, etc., etc. But let's come back to this sutta. We're doing it now, the Anicca Sanya Sutta. So we understand the impermanence of the sensual pleasures. We developed impermanence in that realm. And as I also mentioned the other day, that every time you hear something about the world, and when you hear that, it feels like, now you kind of, you get afraid, or you worry about it, or you say, oh no, this is happening in the world. Every time you have that feeling, it means you haven't really understood anicca, impermanence. Every time you see something in the news, the world going wrong, every time you see whatever it is happening, and there's always things going wrong, all of that is part of your anicca sanya possibility, and it kind of leaves you kind of bit more cold about the world, less interested in the world. And that's kind of the idea here. Detaches you a little bit. Yes. Okay, so that is the anicca sanya in relation to sensual pleasures. And that is the most important one. If you do that one fully, it allows you, together with the building up of the positive qualities, the joy, it then gives you access to samadhi when you do that. And that's kind of the first thing that we want to do on the Buddhist path. Give us access to real meditation. And when you get access to that, then you are on the highway out of samsara. But then, when you get access to real deep meditation, there is another problem. And then you will probably enjoy that good meditation, and you probably will attach a little bit to it, because it is just like you attach to the sensory realm, then you attach to the higher realms instead. You will notice that it is not so much that you can choose not to be attached. You will be attached to something. It is about what you are attached to. And we want to first of all drop the attachment to the five sense realm and attach a little bit to the realm of deep meditation, because that will then help us to move forward. So here, Bhante Sujato is translating rupa as luminous form. And the idea, of course, is that when you come to the jhana states, there is an aspect of rupa, but it's really kind of just this luminosity or space feeling or something like that. It is very hard to really relate it to ordinary form in the sensual realm. This is why he translates it in this way. It's a luminous state, and it's really not relatable to the normal way we think about forms. But there's some aspect of form, very refined, still remaining there. And so how do we deal with that? And this is where the more profound contemplation of anicca comes in. And you see this in the suttas in many places, how to develop that kind of anicca. And that is when you look at the jhanas and you understand that even these powerful samadhis, they come. You attain them, and then they have to go afterwards. They too are impermanent. They too only last so long, and then they are gone afterwards. And this is very radical, because this is exactly, it goes counter to the whole idea in ancient India that when you attain samadhi, according to the ancient Brahmanical tradition of ancient India, the teachings you have in the Vedas, the Upanishads, the ancient Hindu scriptures, there, when you come to samadhi, that's it. You have come to the essence of the universe. You have come to the self. You have discovered the Atman inside. So they say that when you come to samadhi, that is the discovery of the Atman. And then when you die, that Atman will be released and will then be the same as Brahman. Brahman is like the universal consciousness. You see in the suttas, it says, so atta, so loko. That's that thing. Loko is the world, it's the Brahman. So atta is the self. So atta, so loko. The world and the self are the same. That's what it means. And it refers to these ancient Brahmanical teachings. And so the Buddha says, no, it is the wrong way of thinking about it. Just because you achieve samadhi does not mean that that state is yourself. If you look at the samadhi, it arises, and then you come out of samadhi. So how can you say it lasts forever? How can you say it is a self? Even though it is very tempting to see it that way, you haven't really investigated properly. That's what the Buddha says. And this is really difficult, because the states of samadhi feel like you have achieved the meaning of life. That's what it feels like. No more craving, no more desire, nowhere to go. This is it. This is the meaning of life. That's what it feels like in these states. And so why would you go any further? And because they feel like the meaning of life, because there's no desire, there's nowhere else to go, because they have the supreme bliss of the jhanas, because they are completely unified, there's a non-duality. Ekatta, it is called in the Chula Sunyata Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 121. Ekatta, the oneness of samadhi. It is the same thing as the Advaita Vedanta. Advaita means the non-dual Vedanta. This is the Advaita of Buddhism, the non-duality, the states of samadhi. And so it feels like you have found kind of the source of the universe. It feels like you are unified with everything. You have become God in a sense. And if you have become God, Many people would say you can't go any further if you become God. This is God that will do for me. I don't want to go beyond God. God is kind of good enough, and so you are satisfied with that. But then the Buddha comes along, but he says even these things that are so profound, that are so extraordinary, they too, if you investigate properly, they actually arise and pass away. They are not an essence, they are not a reality. He tells the whole Brahmanical tradition, sorry, you guys, that's just translating into modern vocabulary, sorry, you guys, you got it all wrong. This is not the way it works. This is how it works. Listen carefully. You see it arising and passing away. And then, this is how you see the anicca of samadhi. You look inside of yourself. You see how the samadhi is created by the will. Your mind is moving in that direction. You enter samadhi, and then later on, when the samadhi comes to an end, you have to come out again. You understand the anicca even of this. And this is where awakening starts to happen, when you see this kind of anicca. So now we have dealt with the kama loka and the rupa loka. This is almost everything that you have to worry about. There can still, however, be some sense of existence left, even beyond that. And that is why you have eliminated the desire for rebirth in the future life. You don't want to be reborn at all anymore. And that is where the arahantship comes in. Because you understand that rebirth itself is this impermanent thing which just takes you up and down, back and forth. The whole idea of rebirth is terrible. And so you give up your desire for rebirth. That is really when you come to this point where you can become an arahant at this particular point. So this is degrees of impermanence, moving from the more coarse to the more refined. And then comes the final impermanence, the final contemplation. The perception of impermanence eliminates all ignorance, all avidya, and eradicates the conceit, I am, the asmimana. And this is the final kind of eradication. You see everything is impermanent in the world. Because you see everything is impermanent, you know everything is dukkha. Because everything is dukkha and impermanent, it is non-self. And so you gain the full insight into the three characteristics. That means you let go of everything, and that is avidya gone. Vidya arising, avidya disappearing. And an important part of that is you giving up the asmimana. Asmimana is the conceit, I am. It means the feeling I am is gone. You become a stream enterer, you give up sakkaya ditthi. You become an arahant, you give up the asmimana. The feeling I am, I own, I am something, all of that is completely gone at this particular point. And that is where you become an arahant. Why do you give that up? Because you see impermanence, you see changeability, you know that I am. There's nothing in the world that actually corresponds to the feeling I am. Nothing in the world corresponds to that feeling, and so the feeling is false, the feeling is empty, and you have to give it up. So that is the idea of the anicca sanya, and keep it simple. This is very profound. Keep it at your level, whatever your level is. And don't advance beyond where you are at, and then it will be very powerful. And now comes a long sequence of similes, and these similes just drive home the power of the perception of impermanence, the anicca sanya. And so the Buddha says, in the autumn, a farmer plowing with a large plow shears through all the root networks. In the same way, when the perception of impermanence is developed, it eradicates, etc., etc., it eradicates all conceit, I am. So the idea, when you are plowing with a plow, all the roots are cut off, and so there is no possibility of anything re-arising again in the future. Once you become an arahant, you have done the job. There's nothing more to do. All the causes and conditions for rebirth, all the causes and conditions for dukkha have been eliminated. There's no more root that will cause it to sprout again in the future. A reed cutter, having cut the reeds, grabs them at the top and shakes them down, shakes them about and shakes them off. In the same way, when the perception of impermanence is developed, it eradicates all the conceit I am. So I guess the idea here is that you pull the reed off, you cut it, and then you pull it off whatever it's holding to, and so it doesn't have any hold anymore. It doesn't hold to the tree. And once the hold of the reed is gone, it has lost its grip, and there is no more future for that reed. That reed has kind of had it. Is that what it means? Reed cutter, I think I'm mixing things up here. Anyway, it means something like that. I'm not sure exactly how the simile is to be understood. I think I'm mixing up a reed with a climbing plant. But anyway, whatever. It has some meaning in that area, that it will not regrow again in the future. The next one is more obvious. When a stalk of a bunch of mangoes is cut, all the mangoes attached to the stalk will follow along. In the same way, when the perception of impermanence is developed, it eradicates all conceit I am. Yeah, you cut the stalk, then everything down from that stalk, beyond that stalk, is done for. So everything is gone. Again, the idea of the root being eradicated, the causes and conditions being cut off. The rafters of a bungalow all lean to the peak, slow to the peak, and meet at the peak. So the peak is said to be the topmost of them all. In the same way, when the perception of impermanence is developed, it eradicates all the conceit I am. So here you have the idea of the perception of impermanence being the topmost, being at the peak. The peak is where all these other perceptions meet. And that's kind of fascinating. I've just been talking about how dukkha comes out of anicca, how anatta comes out of anicca, how the contemplation of death is about anicca. You can see how anicca kind of brings everything together, and that's why it is so powerful. It brings everything together at the peak of the roof, and the rest of the roof, in large extent, relies on that peak for everything to hold together. So if you can understand anicca, everything else also unravels as a consequence. Of all kinds of fragrant root, the spikenard is said to be the best. In the same way, when the perception of impermanence is developed, it eradicates all conceit I am. So, I have no idea what a spikenard is. Has anyone heard of spikenard before? Don't know. It's fragrant, obviously, so it is the best kind of fragrance. I guess that is all that matters. And so it is the most fragrant. In other words, it is the most powerful, the most useful, the thing which gives you the most fragrance of the Dhamma. The fragrance of the Dhamma is incorporated into the anicca sanya. Of all kinds of fragrant heartwood, the red sandalwood is said to be the best. In the same way, the perception of impermanence, when developed and cultivated, eradicates all conceit I am. Of all kinds of fragrant flower, jasmine is said to be the best. In the same way, when the perception of impermanence is developed, it eradicates the conceit I am. All lesser kings are vassals of a wheel-turning monarch. So the wheel-turning monarch is said to be the foremost of them all. In the same way, the perception of impermanence is developed, it eradicates all conceit I am. So all of this gives you an idea of the power of the contemplation of impermanence, anicca sanya, and how it brings everything together in this way. The radiance of all the stars is not worth a 16th part of the moon's radiance. So the moon's radiance is said to be the best of them all. In the same way, when the perception of impermanence is developed, it eradicates all conceit I am. So it shines, it outshines everything else. After the rainy season, the sky is clear and cloudless, and when the sun rises, it dispels all the darkness from the sky as it shines and glows and radiates. In the same way, when the perception of impermanence is developed and cultivated, it eliminates all sensual desire, pleasures, the desire for rebirth in the realm of luminous form, the desire for rebirth in a future life. It eliminates all ignorance and eradicates all conceit, I am. The idea of the sun radiating and dispelling the darkness is a very powerful one, just like insight dispels the darkness in the mind, and the mind becomes radiant as a consequence. And how is the perception of impermanence developed and cultivated so that it eradicates all conceit, I am? Such is form, such is the origin of form, this is rupa, such is the ending of form, such is feeling, such is perception, such are the sankharas, the choices, such is consciousness, such its origin, such its ending. So you cultivate the 5 khandhas in this way, and all the things that I've been talking about so far are really about understanding the khandhas. When you go through the sequence of meditation and you reflect back on that sequence, all of that is really that investigation into the khandhas and understanding them in this particular way. That is how the perception of impermanence is developed and cultivated so that it eliminates all desire for sensual pleasures, for rebirth in the realm of luminous form, and for rebirth in a future life. That is how it eliminates all ignorance and eradicates the conceit, I am. So there you are, anicca sanya. So take that with you and see what you can do with it. And you can use this almost at any time during your life or during your day. Especially as a monastic, it's kind of great to have these perceptions that you can use at any time, because it's actually much easier to apply these things as a monastic than it is as a layperson. So that is the, again, perception of impermanence. Now what I want to do is to look at a nice sutta which brings out the similes for the 5 khandhas, the 5 aggregates. The Penupinda Sutta is Penupindupama Sutta, and this is one of the most beautiful suttas in my view that kind of talks about the 5 khandhas and what they really are like, how to think about them. And it kind of, as always, one of the most powerful things to me in the suttas is the Buddha's ability to make similes, similes that are really powerful, really meaningful. I just talked a couple of them just before, the similes of the borrowed goods and the simile of the piece of meat, the bird and the piece of meat. And these similes coming now are also kind of these kind of high-quality similes that brings out the message of the Dhamma. The Dhamma has this beautiful mixture of theory on the one hand. You read about it theoretically, it is just like you know it is impermanent, you know it is arising, passing away, and the theory mixed with kind of the similes, which makes it really come alive, makes it very powerful. Anyway, let's see what it has to say. At one time, the Buddha was staying at Ayodhya on the bank of the Ganges River. There the Buddha addressed the mendicants. Mendicants, suppose this river Ganges was carrying along a big lump of foam, and a person with clear eyes would see it and contemplate it, examining it carefully. And it would appear to them as completely void, hollow, and unsubstantial. For what substance could there be in a lump of foam? In the same way, a mendicant sees and contemplates any kind of form at all, past, future, or present, internal or external, coarse or fine, inferior or superior, near or far, examining it carefully, and it appears to them as completely void, hollow, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in form? Rupa, form, appearance, shape. The world of form. And so the idea here is that the body and the things, the shapes of the world, they are hollow, like a lump of foam. And if you think about a lump of foam, it is created by this large mass of bubbles coming together. And a lump of foam, there are bubbles being disintegrating and new bubbles forming all the time. So the foam is always changing its shape slowly, and gradually kind of diminishing. And if you look at the human body, especially because that's kind of the main thing with form and rupa, there are other forms of course, that's the main thing we often talk about. It is also changing all the time, always moving about, until one day it pops completely and it's gone, just like this lump of foam. And there's no essence to it. There's nothing inherent to it. It is just this temporary causes and phenomena coming together, creating this body, coming out of the four elements of the world around us. And the four elements somehow, miraculously, I don't know how it's possible, but somehow these four elements around us create this body. Isn't that astonishing? That somehow this body comes out of the four elements. You take a bit of earth, you take a bit of water, you take a bit of fire, a bit of air, you mold it together, bang, human being. Isn't that kind of astonishing? And this is kind of done by DNA, of course, and all of these kind of things. But reality, of course, is that it is just these elements. And then it goes back to nature again. The elements go back into nature, and then it goes into a plant, and it becomes kind of a rice in the kind of paddy fields around here, and then you eat that rice. It's like eating your grandma or something, So you eat your grandma, and then the cycle goes around and around like this. Who are you? Who are we? What is this body? It's nothing. It's just things coming together temporarily, then disappearing again. Lump of foam. What substance could there be to a lump of foam? What substance could there be to form, to rupa? Suppose it was the time of autumn, when the rain was falling heavily, and a bubble on the water forms and pops right away. And a person with clear eyes would see it and contemplate it, examining it carefully. And it would appear to them as completely void, hollow, and insubstantial. For what substance could there be in a water bubble? In the same way, a mendicant sees and contemplates any kind of feeling at all, examining it carefully, and it appears to them as completely void, hollow, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in feeling? So here we have something that is far more impermanent. The body can last maybe for a whole lifetime. It goes on for, if you are lucky, it goes on for 80 or 90 years. If you're not so lucky, not so long. But at least it has a certain degree of a certain time that it lasts. But feelings, they come and go so fast, right? Just sitting here now, you can look at something, you look at this building. It's a beautiful building, and you think, wow, and you kind of get a pleasant feeling because it's a beautiful building. And then you may look at something which is unpleasant. It's hard to find anything unpleasant in here. But suddenly your senses shift. Maybe you hear a noise, you hear the truck on the road. Okay, that's a little bit unpleasant, right? So you hear the truck on the nose. So you see things, and one moment later you hear the truck on the road. And then you smell something, whatever it is, and that may be pleasant again. And then you have a thought which is no good, and that is unpleasant. And you can see how your feelings are just going about all the time, so fast, popping, another one arising. It's this eternal kind of whirl of feelings. And this is one of the reasons why when you get into meditation it is so delightful, because you eliminate so much of this diversity of feeling, and you're moving towards happiness which lasts much longer. And when you enter a deep samadhi, the happiness can last for a really, really long time, for hours. And that's why it is one of the reasons why it is so such a refuge from the world of this ever twirl and whirlwind of feelings moving around. So feelings are so incredibly insubstantial, and yet feelings are so important to us. Feelings are what our lives really are about, despite the insubstantiality, despite our inability to control them, despite how they arise out of cause and conditions. And in the end, you just have to accept whatever comes about. I should maybe also say that when we look at these similes, you will notice that it says, a person with clear eyes. Yeah? It is not just anyone who understands feelings. It is not just anyone who understands the bubble on the river Ganges. You have to have clear eyes. Now, let me check what clear eyes is in Pali, because I'm a little bit confused now. So just to be absolutely I hope you will forgive me for my little escapades into the suttas. It just says Chakuma, the one who has eyes. That's all it has in the Pali. So Ajahn Sudato translates it as clear eyes, and I think that is probably justified. It doesn't just mean that you see, it means that you see carefully, right? It kind of makes sense. And then you, nijayaya, what does that mean? Contemplate, you see it, contemplate it, nijayaya. This is probably to refer to nijayati, okay, nijayati, which is ditinikantang nijanang. So this means that you, something like that. Okay, contemplate it probably makes sense. And I just have to accept Bhante Sujato's translation there, and then carefully examining it, which is yoniso upaparikeya. So that means like careful or wise attention to the thing. Yeah. So in other words, it's not just that you are seeing these things, but you are seeing these things with a clear mind. And this means the mind usually after samadhi, when the mind is free of the 5 hindrances, and you have the ability to do the yoniso, the wise kind of, careful kind of reflection. So this is what is going on here. So this is an important part of the sutta, right? That you do these things with the right kind of mind state. So you see it again as hollow, and of course a very important part of this as well is that when you do contemplate both the form and the feeling, all form, all feeling is included. Past, future and present, eternal, external, coarse and fine, inferior and superior, near or far, all form, all feeling, all the 5 khandhas. And that is a very important point because that kind of takes out any kind of loopholes. In the Anapanasati Sutta, it talks about sabbang vinyanang or sabbang rupang, etc., all form. And there's a similar kind of phrasing as you find here. So let us go on to the next one. This is now we're coming to perception. Suppose that in the last month of summer, at noon, a shimmering mirage appears, and a person with clear eyes would see it, contemplate it, examining it carefully, and it would appear to them as completely void, hollow, and insubstantial. For what substance could there be in a mirage? In the same way, a mendicant sees and contemplates any kind of perception at all, past, future, present, eternal, external, coarse, fine, inferior, superior, near and far, examining it carefully, and it appears to them as completely void, hollow, and insubstantial. For what substance could there be in perception? So this idea of a mirage is a very kind of powerful simile again, because we all know what the mirage is like. You're traveling somewhere and the bitumen is hot and it looks like there's water on the bitumen. That's kind of the most typical mirage, yeah? Or you are walking in the desert and the hot air makes it look like a lake in the desert, similar kind of feeling. Yeah? But of course there is no water. It is a complete illusion what you are seeing. Yeah? And our perceptions are a bit like that. The things that we see in the world, especially when it comes to the ideas that we have about the world, the ideas are not really substantial. They are just a particular way of looking at the world. You think of people, you think of a person as your friend or as an enemy. What are they? Are they a friend or an enemy? Today they are your enemy, tomorrow they are your friend. The perception, another person will see them as a friend. Is that substantial, or is it just in your mind? Is it something that you make up? And so much of the world around us, we make this kind of judgment. What about food? Is the food nice or not nice? It depends on the day. It depends where you grow up. It depends on the conditioning. It depends on how hard you try to like it. It depends on all of these kind of things. Everything in our life, all the perceptions that we have are of this kind, malleable, changeable, always moving around. And even the perceptions that seem more solid, like this perception of a building here, for example, how solid is it really? We perceive it in one way now. Next year we will see it differently. I remember a few years ago, I went back to the house where I grew up in Norway, and I remember when I was a child, I would kind of mess around like young children do. We're kind of playing soccer in the streets, and the neighbors would come out and yell at us, "Don't destroy our garage," and we wouldn't really care all that much about the neighbors. And we kind of, you get up to mischief when you are kind of a young child and you're having a good time and enjoying yourself. And then I went back, and this was about 40 years later, and I looked at the place and I wondered, is this where I grew up? I had no connection anymore. It didn't mean anything to me. The whole perception was changed. Before, it was a place that I was attached to. That was kind of my home, where I lived. All my friends were. Now, it was meaningless. I didn't know anyone there anymore. Everyone had moved away. It felt empty, hollow, insubstantial. There was nothing there of any meaning. And it reminded me of how we kind of move on in the world. Everything always changing meaning. Nothing can really be held on to. The idea of perception being insubstantial. Who your friends are, who your family is, the religion that you hold on to. Next life, maybe you will be, I don't know what you will be next life, a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, probably a Buddhist, but you have no idea what's going to happen next time around. It's just so, everything in our life is unreliable in this way. And so, what is interesting about this, of course, is that it also opens up some very powerful possibilities. If you understand how unreliable, how changeable these perceptions are, it means we can use that malleability to our own benefit. It means that we can change everything in our minds. It means that the people who you think are your enemies, you can make them your friends. And if they don't like you, it is not your problem, it's their problem. You can still like them because of how you perceive them. And so as a Buddhist, we should have no enemies in the whole world. Having enemies is a kind of a madness. Everyone in the world deserves either metta or compassion. Every single person in this world. And you can change your perceptions very gently using the idea of conditionality and all of these kind of things to have a positive perception of everyone. And this is the positive side of the idea of the mirage. We can change the way we deal with things, change the way, and hence the power of the development of perceptions as a consequence. So perceptions are like a mirage. Now, next one, sankharas. Suppose there was a person in need of heartwood. Heartwood is the core of a tree. Wandering in search of heartwood, they would take a sharp axe and enter a forest. There they would see a big banana tree, straight, young, and grown, free of defects. They would cut it down at its base, cut off the top, and unroll the coiled sheaths. But they wouldn't find even sapwood, much less heartwood. And a person with clear eyes would see it and contemplate it, examining it carefully, and it would appear to them as completely void, hollow, and insubstantial. For what substance could there be in a banana tree? In the same way, a mendicant sees and contemplates any choices at all, examining them carefully, and they appear to them as completely void, hollow, and insubstantial. For what substance could there be to choices, to sankharas, to intentions? You see, the idea here is that you start to unroll the sankharas, and the way I would maybe understand that is that you start to practice your samadhi, your anapanasati, and as you do that, the mind becomes peaceful. And as the mind becomes peaceful, it means the sankharas are dying down. This is like the unrolling of the sheets. You You kind of unroll one layer. Okay, these sankharas are gone. Yeah, and what happens when you keep on unrolling like this, becoming more and more peaceful, letting go of more and more sankhara, more and more will, more and more volition? Do you eventually come to the core will, the essential, the essential choice, the real you, the actual doer inside? Is that what you find? Is that the heartwood inside? No. What you find instead is that the sankharas just disappear completely. They are completely gone. The mind achieves complete samadhi, complete stillness. There are no more sankharas. The whole idea of sankhara being you turns out to be a mistake. There's nothing there. There is no essence. It can be given up completely, and lo and behold, giving it up completely is a wonderful thing. It's a powerful kind of bliss, a powerful kind of meaning to get rid of these things. So this is the idea of unrolling the sankharas. And a very important part of the Buddhist path is to unroll the sankharas, because the sankharas are a very powerful sense of self. The person as the doer, the person as the creator in this world. And if you can undo that, then you are you are doing some of the most important work on the highway to awakening itself. These are the things that really make a big difference. So that is sankhara, the emptiness, insubstantiality of sankharas themselves. Sankharas are not you, they are driven by cause and conditions. Whenever you have an act of will, it is not you doing it. It is the cause and conditions from the past forcing you to act in a certain way. That is how sankharas work. So, that is 4 of the 5 khandhas. The last one is the Vijnana Khandha. I will leave it out for now. It is a bit more difficult to understand, so it's nice to start that one afresh when we come out again. So that is all for now. Have a nice lunch, and we'll see you again at 4 o'clock.